Welcome to Your Daily Writing Habit. If you are writing a book or thinking about it, or maybe you've started writing your book but you need some help getting it done, you are in the right place. Good morning, everyone. I'm your host, Christine Whitmarsh. If you're looking for me online, look for Christine Inc., like that stuff we write with. Each day, I'm sharing with you the writing habits I've learned over my 20 years as a ghostwriter, book coach, and author. I have found that three things in particular have a huge impact on your success as an author, and they can even turn someone who barely considers themselves to be a writer into a published book author. Those three things, my pillars here on the show, are writing fundamentals, productivity, and mindset habits. And welcome once again, everyone, here today on Your Daily Writing Habit to talk about the flow state, including how it pertains to authors and creatives, is my guest, Chris M. King. Let me tell you about Chris. Peak performance executive coach and speaker Chris M. King facilitates the journeys that lead to the discoveries that create sustainable transformations for professional organizations, teams, and individuals. Prepackaged solutions have no value in discovery or innovation. He doesn't show clients the way or his way. He guides them in finding their way. Chris has trained and collaborated with the best: the Flow Research Collective, the Flow Genome Project, David Bayer, Brendan Burchard, and Steel Fit, Unbeatable Mind, and completed a master's program in spirituality and psychology at the University of Santa Monica. He also had the good fortune of spending time with and learning from Gene Kranz, NASA flight director for many Apollo and Gemini space missions. He is currently working with retired U.S. Navy SEALs, and he is committed to continuing to up his own game. Chris has consulted on development programs such as Rise Up for You and Zen Warrior Training, has been a featured panelist for Alison Armstrong's Understanding Men seminars, and is a featured Sioux Talks presenter for and a member of Connected Women of Influence. He is an initiated man, quote unquote, through Mankind Project International, and is a contributing featured author for the Good Men Project and Elephant Journal. His first book, Renegotiate Your Existence, Unlock Your Impossible Life, was released in April of this year and is available on Amazon. My goodness, that's so many things. Welcome, Chris. Thank you so much for being here.
That sounds like a really busy individual.
I know. It's amazing you found time to be on the show.
You make time for the things that are important. So thank you so much. I'm really grateful to be here with you.
Awesome. Well, yeah, speaking of that impressive bio, can you break down for us in maybe like the most basic terms? Who do you serve and what do you do for them in like the simplest terms possible?
Yeah, thanks. When we talk about peak performance and what we do for our clients is we are leveraging everything they have and everything they are to their betterment and their benefit. Because essentially what peak performance really is that it's getting your physiology and your psychology to work for you instead of against you. And when you do that, you make magic happen.
Awesome. And I like the magic part. That's good.
It seems magical,
yes.
Because we say, look, when you want to make the impossible a reality really quickly, that's a great time to give us a call.
That's awesome. And I think a lot of authors feel that way sometimes about book writing, which is why they listen to the show. And we have to harness our own magic as authors. So now I want to talk about one of my favorite things. I've actually written about this before, especially in the context of being a professional creative author, and that is flow. So how do you define the flow state in general and specifically for creative people?
It's a great question. What flow has many names. Athletes call it being in the zone. Basketball players specifically call it going unconscious. We know it as runner's high. Essentially, what a flow state is a optimum state of consciousness where you feel your best, you perform your best, you're never stressed out, and you've never been more innovative. And it turns out that this is available to anybody. You don't have to be an athlete. You can be a jazz musician. You can be a writer. You can be a chess player. I mean, really, anybody can get into flow.
That's awesome. And are there any distinctions between, the regular flow state and like what a flow state might look like for an author?
Well, I think for an author, it's that space where the writing seems to be coming through you. There's that sense of oneness that with the work that the author is working on. There's no There's no ego construct. There's no I that's present. There's just that, wow, this seems effortless. And time passes in a really funny way. You get like time dilation, where it seems like half an hour went by, but when you finally look up, 3 hours had passed and you're just on fire. That's a flow state for writers.
That's awesome. And do you, kind of like just going with the conversation here, do you have any kind of tips or strategies that you could share about how to get into that? Or is that even a relevant question, how to get into a flow state?
Yeah, that's a great question, because flow is a very personal kind of thing. What gets me into flow is not necessarily what's going to get you or somebody else into flow. There are 22 flow triggers that we know of right now. And
wow.
There's even what I call the flow paradox, because like I said, one of the signature feelings about flow is that there's no I. I mentioned that earlier. There's no ego construct, right? So there's what I call the flow paradox. If you say, I'm trying to get into flow, that in and of itself is going to keep you out of it, right? So the idea, the opportunity is to understand what these flow triggers are. How do we set the conditions in my world so that those triggers are present to generate flow states as much as possible? So what I say is, flow is not the goal, it's the result. The goal is to set the conditions, circumstances, and behaviors so that flow becomes available.
That's awesome. And I love what you mentioned, the 22 flow triggers and flow paradox. Do you have information on that somewhere on your website? If people wanted to find out what those are.
Well, the flow triggers are, there's a guy by the name of Keith Sawyer that identified the 22 flow triggers. A few of them are going to be passion. Okay, you got to love what you're doing in order to get into flow. Autonomy, right? You need to be able to steer your own ship and feel like you can do it well. So this is why, like, organizations or people that are micromanaged are never going to get into flow, because they don't have any autonomy. So you got to have the freedom to kind of do your thing in your way. You need complete concentration. So if you have your cell phone going off every 4 minutes with a text message or a notification, that is going to lock you out of flow. So complete concentration. There needs to be a little bit of risk involved. So the challenge that somebody is working on, the perceived challenge, needs to be slightly above their perceived skill set, because, and this all boils down to neurochemistry, right? Well, I said earlier that it's about getting your physiology to work for you instead of against you. And you need certain physiology happening in terms of brain chemistry, in terms of your psychology. So like in the case of risk, when there's something at risk, we tend to pay attention, because there's a chemical in the brain called norepinephrine, and it is designed to focus you, right? It's a focusing chemical. So if that's not present, you're not going to be able to get into flow. But if all of these triggers, as many of them as possible, are present, this is what's going to generate that flow state.
I love that. I want to learn about all 22 of them. So we'll see if we can find some information. I'm sure everybody listening does as well. I love the risk part. I think that applies to so many people writing books that don't think they're able to. So all of you that fall into that category, see, this is a good thing that you feel like you're not able to write a book, that you can use that to your advantage by the sounds of it. Love that.
Yes. Fear is a flow trigger. You need the fear. You also need to understand how to leverage it so that it catapults you forward instead of paralyzes you.
That's awesome. This is all so inspiring so far. I just want to talk about flow all day long.
Me too.
Yeah, right. Imagine that. It's like me wanting to talk about books all day long and writing habits. So two big words are coming up for me in my head right now in relation to flow or lack thereof. I'm sure on behalf of all the authors. Writer's block. Is there a connection there? Are there dots to connect between what we consider what people call writer's block and flow?
Well, flow is a massive increase in creativity, and writer's block. If I understand, and look, I'm being an author is not like you mentioned something earlier. I barely identify. Like, I happen to write a book. That doesn't mean I'm an author, right? There's sort of like a disconnect there for me. But I will say this much, is that the creativity comes from a very different place than the big brain thinking. Now I actually have a colleague who works with creatives specifically. Her name is Pauline Dougal. She's fantastic. She works with creatives in flow. And she understands that when we are thinking about something, like we're trying to problem solve, or we're trying to figure something out, this is big brain thinking, okay? Now I'm going to go a little bit down the rabbit hole of physiology here. But so that happens, most of your big brain thinking happens in the front of your brain, called the prefrontal cortex. It's about the size of 2 walnuts right up in the front of your brain. And this is where big brain thinking happens. And the brain waves associated with big brain thinking are very high, okay, like up, even up to gamma, which is the highest brain waves. Creativity does not happen there. Creativity happens down around the alpha, the alpha theta border is actually where flow happens. And so I'm going to use a big term here that just makes me sound smarter than I am. There's an element of flow called transient hypofrontality. And what that is referring to is the prefrontal cortex is actually going offline a little bit. So as that goes offline without the amygdala, the fight or flight response, without that coming online, these other parts of the brain light up, and this is where the creativity comes from, and this happens in a much more relaxed state. So if you're experiencing writer's block and you're trying to quote unquote figure it out, stop trying to figure it out. Go play with the dog, go for a walk out in nature for a half hour or something. Forget that the problem even exists, get hyper focused in the moment and relax and allow whatever's going to come forward will. Because essentially what's happening is that the conscious mind kicks the problem over into the unconscious mind. The unconscious mind still processes through it while you're out playing with the dog or playing the piano or doing whatever you're doing. And when the unconscious mind figures out, it kicks the answer over back into the conscious mind. And that is the aha moment. So it's very counterintuitive. I'm trying to figure it out. That's when you stop and go for a walk.
That's awesome. And thank you for putting neurological terms, another one of my favorite things to talk about, to something I've talked about probably many times on this show. I think I use the example of housework for some reason does it for me. So I talked about this. So now you've just attached a neurological explanation to my thing of stop forcing yourself to come up with an answer, because I think I've said that's not the way your brain works. So you've just explained how our brain actually does work. So thank you for that.
There you go. You got to use the right tool for the job.
Absolutely. So that's great. And I'm intrigued by another phrase I saw while perusing your website, and of course the title of your book, and of course being a word obsessed person, renegotiate your existence. So what does that mean, and how did you come up with that?
It was very easy to come up with for me because I didn't. So it was my co-author Michael Ashley who really structured this for me and was able to extract everything in my head, because like I said, I'm not a writer. I don't know how to sit down and write a book. And so I was able to collaborate with Michael. He says, okay, look, let's do a major brain dump. Got everything out of my head, wrote the book, and then I completely rewrote the book, and then I rewrote the book again, right? But somewhere in there, he had that phrase. It was right in the beginning, and because he wanted to emphasize the importance of this. And when people asked me, what's the title of your book, I had no idea until I read that line. And that was when I rewrote the whole book, it was with that line in mind, because you can renegotiate your relationship with somebody, whether it's your boss or romantic partner or your best friend. You can renegotiate your job, your salary, your working conditions. And as it turns out, you can renegotiate your entire experience, your entire existence on this planet.
That's awesome. So as an author that's feeling uncertain about their ability to write a book, can they renegotiate their relationship with how they feel about writing a book? Whether they think they can. Yeah. Absolutely.
Look, whatever, this is all I'm going to use a lot of pseudo-poetic one-liners or quotes from famous smart people, right? Whatever you think, you're right. I think that was Henry Ford,
Yeah.
So
whether you think you can or think you can't, yeah.
Exactly, right? So it's here's the weird thing too, is that consciousness has an interesting effect on physical world reality. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of metaphysics here or anything. I will say this much though. A task, for example, will expand or contract based on the amount of time the individual is holding in their consciousness that it will take. This is the same thing with sales figures, right? People believe based on history that this is how much that their sales can increase or whatever, 10%, 15%. The reality is that's a completely arbitrary number. Sure, it's based on data points and things like this, but the reality is what you're holding in your consciousness as truth is far more impactful and will affect reality much more than any data point. And I can prove this.
That's awesome. And I think I'm going to advertise this episode as renegotiate your experience as an author. I really love
You
that.
absolutely can. Look, if I wrote a book, anybody can, okay? But
yeah. And you know what? You keep saying that you're not a writer, but then you just said something about rewriting your own book 3 times. So I'm going to hereby certify that you're a writer. So now that we're calling you that,
okay.
what were your biggest obstacles in getting your book done, and how did you get around those obstacles? Especially, it sounds like when you didn't consider yourself to be a writer.
Right. That was the biggest one right there, because the term author did not resonate with my self-concept. And we talk about self-concept in the book, right? You cannot rise above the level of your self-concept. If you do not believe yourself to be a writer, it will be very difficult. So I was able to sort of have some baby steps, like some little stepping stones, like, okay, well, I acknowledge that I'm not holding in my consciousness, in my self-concept, that I am a writer. So I do hold this truth in my consciousness that I write well. I do write well. Okay, good. So that's a step in the right direction. Some people say, like, use affirmations, like, oh, I'm a great writer, and I visualize this. And if that works for you, great, use it. Affirmations don't work for me, because I kind of have this internal BS detector that knows when I'm lying to myself. It goes, wrong, no, you're not, right? So if I can't make that jump, I'm going to look for things like, okay, well, here's how to start hacking your own system. Again, whatever you believe is the truth will become the truth. So start to challenge this and see if you can hypothesize and then prove some data points to the hypothesis. So I said, okay, I'm not a writer, fine. Maybe I am a writer. Maybe I am an author. If that's true, look through my history and see if there are any data points that might support that story. And it turns out there are. Right? Oh, well, when I was in school, I wrote this. That was really good. When I was at hippie school, like you mentioned, I like to call it hippie school. I went to hippie school. And they said, well, we need to write this big term paper. That thing was 400 pages long. Now, right there, that disentangled my nonsense story that I could never write a book, right? So it really was about challenging what I think was quote unquote fact. Because again, facts are based on what I'm holding in my consciousness, not the other way around.
That's awesome. And I'm thinking of so many things here. First of all, my own introduction, where I talk about how this show can turn someone who doesn't really see themselves as an author into a published author. And this is really great, because you've taken my little intro to the next level by saying, okay, well, how do we do that? And what I'm getting from you is, find the thing, find that data point that you agree with. And I'm thinking of a book coaching client, and I know she listens to the show, and I know she's going to recognize herself, where when she first came to me, she said, I'm not an author, I'm not a writer. And we're just trying to, I realize now, find that data point that could transform her into an author. And one thing she did tell me from the very beginning, she said, well, I am a storyteller. People tell me that I'm a really great storyteller, and I tell stories really well in my corporate life and in my personal life. So it's really interesting, because now I'm realizing that's the data point that we grabbed onto. I said, great, you're a storyteller. I can work with that. And from there, we grabbed that data point and transform her into an author. And she's a best-selling author now, and she's on her second book, and it's amazing. But I'm realizing, again, once again, Chris, you're doing a great job at kind of like adding all like the background neurology and brain process and all like the methodology behind stuff that I've kind of been doing with my authors anyway.
Exactly. We have a science-backed approach. It's like, if you were to tell me what's going on with your client, like the relationship that you just described, and now she's a best-selling author, I can tell you, here's the neurophysiology behind what's going on. Here is how you can consciously drive that neurophysiology to completely change physiologically the way her brain works. We change the way your brain works. We change the way it fires. What fires together wires together, and you become a whole new person. So, like I tell people, you tell me what your impossible is. You tell me what you really want. We'll show you how to make it a reality.
I love that. I'm taking notes here. Tell me what your impossible is. We're an informal show here on Your Daily Writing Habit. Tell me what your impossible is.
I have 3 clients I have three questions for every new client. What do you want? Question 2, what do you really want? Question 3, stop it. What do you really, really want? Then we get there.
And you're coming, just the way that you talk, Chris, there's all these catchphrases and right. So yeah, you're hereby not allowed to call yourself not a writer anymore, to use I think triple negatives at that, because you're very good at writing. So lots of data points there that I'm seeing here. So yeah, excellent things. And finally, given the name of this show, Your Daily Writing Habit, could you share about your writing habits, or, you know, if you're not comfortable sharing your writing habits since you don't consider yourself a writer, any other productivity or mindset habits that have helped you write your book?
Wow. Well, for me personally, I'd say I'll give you the hardest step was the first one, getting started. I probably noodled on writing a book for a decade, and that's not an understatement. And the book, whatever book was to come of that, I'm sure went through many different sort of reinventions and what it might look like and what it might be. So it's getting started. I heard a story. I want to say it was about Hemingway. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but somebody had asked, do you write according to a schedule, or do you write when you are inspired? And the answer, if I remember correctly, was I write when I'm inspired, and that happens at 9 a.m. every single day. Yes. And so what we're talking about here, and again, I'm going to get a little bit of quantum physics here. We're talking about space. We're talking about space and time altogether. If I decide I want to write a book, I need to create intentional space for that. If you decide that you want to have a child, the best time to build a nursery isn't after you get pregnant. It's before you get pregnant. It's creating that space. It's creating the energy and the universe. I know it can be a little woo here. Like I said, I went to hippie school, but I do have a science-backed approach, right? So I got both.
Yeah.
So the reality is I want to write a book. Okay, great. So I'm going to challenge the belief that I'm not a writer. I know I can write stories. I can tell stories. If I tell a story out loud, record it, and then type it, great. I've just written a story, so now I'm a story writer, not just a storyteller. Great. I'm bridging the gaps, making those steps. And then at whatever time every day for, I don't know, an hour, I'm just going to sit at a blanking cursor. If that's all that happens, then that's okay. But I'm going to create the space. I'm going to communicate to the universe that I'm serious and that I'm open. And I'm willing to be in a space of humility to challenge that, you know what, maybe I'm wrong. Because remember, the ego construct that says, I'm God's greatest gift to writing is the exact same ego construct, same size, same power as the one that says, I'm not a writer, no, I have nothing to say, I'm useless. It's just on the other side of the spectrum.
That's awesome. And I hope my regular listeners are hearing two words pop into their head very loudly at this point, the two words that they hear me talk about quite a bit, which is writing cave, because Chris, you just really described the neuropsychology of the writing cave, which is why I always have my clients and my listeners, you put it on your schedule and you show up, and I don't care if you sit there, like you just said, staring at a blinking cursor for an hour and a half, and then something comes to you, or if maybe that's all that happens, but you really just described the neuropsychology of the writing cave.
Well, it's not similar in my head to playing jazz. There's no sheet music. Just start blowing some notes through the saxophone. Start striking some keys on the piano. See what comes through.
Yeah, and the most important thing that I always tell people, first you have to show up. And to show up, generally you have to schedule it, because that, like we were talking about, creating space. And for me, the first thing that I tell all my authors, they come to me and they're worried about word counts and publishing plans and marketing. And I say, that's great. Where is writing on your schedule? Like, if you send me your schedule right now, I want to see where writing is scheduled on. Oh, well, it's nowhere yet. Okay, then don't maybe worry about your launch plan yet, because writing needs to appear somewhere in your life right now.
Yeah, and I think it's important to write what is true. Like, authenticity is so important when it comes to creativity. Let the marketing people, let the publishers figure out how to position it, what is the cover going to look like, how are we going to say this in a way that's going to land with my audience. Forget all that shit for now. Just write what's true. Let it be a mess. Let it be a complete nonsensical disaster in your own egoic mind. Write what's true, and at least you have something to work with from that point.
Absolutely. And if you do, authors, they do want to think about marketing and launch and all that's later. I mean, it kind of cracks me up because they're worried about all kinds of things that are at the end of the foot race. It's like, but maybe write a great book first and then think about all those things. So it's staying in that present moment, creating that space, and then following through with that commitment to the space on a regular basis. And that's the writing habit.
Exactly. Now, it's also a function of alignment. When you're in that space,
Yep.
you want your brain waves to be in a certain space. You want your brain chemistry to
Yep.
be in a certain way. Like, so again, it's about setting the conditions of the flow triggers
Yep.
to make sure that you are optimizing that opportunity. Because if you just schedule your time and you don't really set the conditions, you're probably just going to end up frustrated. 2 weeks later, you're like, forget it, I quit, right?
I love that. So are these things that you talk about in your book more about the conditions and things like that? Or I just want to make sure I can send people to learn more, because you're just introducing so many great conversations that sync so well with what I talk about here on the show and a lot of the concerns of my listeners. So where can they go to learn more about all these great conversations you've started today?
Thank you. The book, or the toolbox, as I like to call it, because that's really what it is. It's a toolbox,
Good.
and it's filled with some case studies, and here's the science behind why it works, and blah, blah, blah. Is available on Amazon. Renegotiate Your Existence, Unlock Your Impossible Life. I am, because I did digital audio production for a long time, I am getting out of my own way once again to do an audio book. So as soon as I finish that, then we'll get that up on, Audible or something, but right now it's available in hard copy and digital on Amazon.
Awesome. And I will throw some links to all the things I can find, your website, your book, all the things, into our show notes. And thank you so much for being on the show today, Chris. Just so much information. My mind is spinning.
My pleasure. Yeah, I tend to
way.
skip off the atmosphere. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Like I said, I love talking about this stuff. Getting me to shut up, that's the challenge, really.
I might have to have a sequel to this show. I have the same issue. Perfect. Well, thank you again, and thank you all for joining me here on Your Daily Writing Habit, where I am helping you write and finish writing an awesome book. And speaking of the show notes, I always put a link to my Inc. Authors group on Facebook. That's the place to come and talk about the show, connect with me, connect with your fellow listeners. Let us know how we can support your writing goals. Until tomorrow, happy writing.